Our guest today, and we're delighted to have him at Northwest Federal, is an old friend and a top baseball man practically all of his life, with many, many interesting jobs in baseball and a real dedication and devotion to the game, is Frank Lane. So we'll be talking about baseball with Frank. He'll be our guest in just about 1 minute. Our guest at Northwest Federal is Frank Lane, who's been a part of baseball as long as I can remember. He also got the nickname the Trader because he was in action most of the time. Frank, what would you say was the best deal and the worst deal that you ever made?
Well, the best deal I ever made was the first one, when I traded Aaron Robinson to Detroit for Billy Pearson $25,000. If Detroit had waited a week, could have had Aaron Robinson, because I'd asked waivers for the idea of getting rid of him. Not that he had been a good ball player and has been a good ball player, but he's at the end of the line. The worst deal I ever made turned out, of course, when you trade major league ball players, there's no bad major league ball players, but some are better than others, and I try to get those that were better than others. But Fred Hutchison was my manager, and he said, "Frank, we're just too left-handed. Got to get rid of somebody so I can use a right-hander," and they just save all the left-handers. So I traded Bill Verdon to Pittsburgh, got Bobby Del Greco and a left-hand pitcher named Dick Littlefield. Bobby Del Greco was a tremendous defensive outfielder, didn't hit. Littlefield could throw the ball hard and didn't win. I would say that was, because every time I looked up when Verdon come into town, into St. Louis, in the garb of the Pittsburgh club, Verdon was either making a great catch off the fence or hitting one of those dying quails over shortstop for a base hit. So I would say that was the one that panned out the worst.
You were associated with a couple of people in baseball that I can think about that used to give you a few laughs once in a while. What about Max Sircont and Jack Onslow?
Well, now you brought that up. You mean Sirloin Max, huh? I remember we were beating Detroit in about the sixth inning, about 5-2, something like that, for the sixth inning. And Sircont was pitching, and Vic Wirtz was playing first base for Detroit, and he hit that's the first time I ever seen a ball player, a pitcher taken out because of a foul ball. And he had 2 bullet line drives in the upper deck at Comiskey Park, fouled about 5 feet, and Onslow took Sircont out because of those 2 foul balls. I would say that Max had been up with the Cardinals before that, and of course, as you know, when I came to Chicago, I had inherited a ball club that the year before had won 50 and lost 103 ball games, a little short on money and a little short on ball players. But I had a formula I followed. I would take a pitcher that had won 8 games and take the pitcher that won 8 games and maybe an infielder and outfielder and give them the other club for a pitcher that won 10 games. When I make 4 deals like that, I've added potentially eight winning games, and followed all the way through. Any time I could get somebody I thought was a little better than what I had, and that meant I had to make a lot of deals. And it wasn't easy to make a lot of deals and convince people or baseball people that a player who had just helped lose 103 ball games was going to help him win. But the fact I threw that extra man in, that was the thing. But most of the time, Bob, and I wouldn't advertise this if I was as active in making deals now, I always had somebody that was on the other club. For instance, I made a deal with the Red Sox and got 4 or 5 good ball players at Milwaukee. There was one player on the Red Sox who would help. Yastrzemski. I went to Yaz. I said, "Yaz, do you think these ball players I've got will help you?" And yeah, well, tell that to Dick O'Connell. I said, "I'm having a hard time getting him to listen. And if you really think these players will help the Red Sox, you go for it." That's the way I made the deal. And every time I made a deal, some player or somebody had influence on that other club, because they'd believe him before they made me, because I was they'd believe me because they would help me make the deal. And that was the secret to it.
What do you remember about those days when you had a lot of laughs with Onslow?
I didn't have many laughs with Onslow.
I remember one night you did up in the Bard's room.
Because Jack, he was from the old school, and we'd always hear, I remember Ed Burns, who was Lord rest his soul, was a very fine sports editor or writer with the Chicago Tribune. used to talk to Onslow, and Jack always hit about 370 in his conversation with Ed Burns. And Ed Burns come in one day and he said, Jack, he said, I just looked up your record and I found that the highest you ever hit with McGraw was 170. And from that time, Jack quit talking to Ed Burns. But Jack had a bad habit of imbibing in spirits fermenti, and when he come out on the bench, I'd go over and I just didn't like it. Not just because I didn't drink, I didn't think that was the place in it. And I think some of the mistakes he made, I wouldn't blame it on Jack because he'd been a fine old baseball man. But this is a tough enough game to do when you're so entirely sober, and he wasn't always entirely sober when he managed the ball club.
I can remember an incident that involved you. You'll probably remember it too. On the roof of the booth, on the roof of the ballpark at St. Louis. You remember that? When I was doing a ball game, and you came in the back of the booth, and your pitcher was having a rough time, and you let out a string of swear words. You remember that?
That couldn't be. I never used that kind of language. But Des Dean was working the game of the week at that particular time, and I had a chair on the roof, and I had gone in really to get a Coca-Cola, and Diz saw that empty chair, said, "Uh-oh," looked like Lane jumped over off the roof. And my wife heard it in St. Petersburg, and she thought that Diz and I had put on the act. Well, that wasn't necessarily an act. A lot of times some of those things happen, I felt like jumping off the roof.
Well, you really enjoyed the game too, didn't you?
I still do, and it's a great game, tremendous game. Some of the people I don't enjoy so much, but most of them are great people. And it's a shame that the player agent come into such a force. With Judge Landis living, it's hard to say, well, if he was living, he'd do this. You know, and I know that there's a lot of things that they do nowadays that Judge Landis wouldn't stand for. He wouldn't stand for an agent having players of 7 or 8 other clubs, different clubs. If they're going to be an agent, they'd have to be an agent of one club. Because there's no doubt about it. Baseball is the most honest of sports. And that Black Sox scandal was proved just a very select few that was run out in a hurry by Judge Landis. And they didn't need it. But the ball players have lost the confidence in the owners. The greatest fans and people they have for them is a man in the front office. He sits there and roots for them, wants them to hit so much that they have to come back for more money. I know I used to be up there and I'd give the scores to the devil because they didn't give one of my players a base hit. And they said, well, Lane, if we give him a base hit, you'll have to pay him more money. I said, I don't care. He's entitled to it. And when you're around ball players, I loved ball players. Because without ball players, I'd probably had to go to work. But at any rate, the greatest thing I get is in Christmas time. I get maybe 200, 250 Christmas cards from players that played for me, and they're my prized possession. And ball players, they had some reasons to be wrong and be mad at times. There was one owner I know would send out the contracts on the 1st of March, cut everybody 15%. And I said to this fellow, I said, what do you do? You know they won't sign that. He said, well, one or two might slip up and sign. He says, but I said, what do you do now? He said, well, I send the second contract. I said, well, you better send the second contract first. And they felt that they needed agents. They didn't think they could cope intelligently with the front office people. And the front office people did not try to fool them. I know that. And the best fans they've got were the people in the front office. They were pulling for them to have great years that would make them entitled to get more money. But it's a shame that some of those things that did happen caused the ball players to be suspect of the people they were doing business with. For instance, that first contract. Why waste sending a contract out to a player you know he won't sign, and say, well, maybe one of the kids will slip up and sign it and save a couple of $1,000. And they finally got so they felt they couldn't cope with the man in the front office, and got these agents. And that is the worst thing that ever happened to baseball. The majority of agents are the cancer of baseball. They are somewhat good. There's Bob Wolf in Boston. He advises the ball players very well, tells them you're getting as much of your worth and everything else, and helps baseball. But too many of them say, well, you're not good enough. They don't know. They're not baseball experts. But the more that player gets, the greater the return he gets off their contract. I believe that every bit of money that transpires between a club and a ball player should not be anybody intercepting and taking 10% off the top, which the agents do.
Our guest today, and we're delighted to have him, is an old friend and a top baseball man, Frank Lane. We'll be back with our guest in just a moment. At Northwest Federal today, we're talking with an old friend and an outstanding baseball man, Frank Lane. Frank, what's happening in baseball today that surprised you?
Well, every day there's something new happens in baseball, but my bugbear is the player's agent. They don't need agents. Why should a player give some agent 5, 10, or 15% of the money he's getting? If any money transpires between a player and a ball club, all of that money should go to the player. He is the fellow that's performing. And they have lost confidence apparently in some people that are in the front office. If they knew him like I know the people in the front office, the best friend they've got is that fellow in that front office. He is a fan. He roots for them. He hopes that they hit 350. He hopes that they're going to be entitled for more money. And yet they are stupid enough to listen to somebody that they have to pay 5, 10, or 15% who doesn't know anything about baseball and doesn't have a cent invested in baseball. And that's the cancer of baseball.
Frank, what can baseball do to give it more of an equity so that more than a couple of clubs are in the running? For example, now the American League, the leaders in both divisions are leading by 7 or 7.5 games, and there are teams like Cleveland out of it. That's one city I never could quite figure out.
Well, Bob, unfortunately, people with money are going to have more and better ball players than people without money. And a city like New York with a population of 10 million is going to be able to go out and spend more for ball players than Arlington, Texas, with 180,000 within the confines of Arlington, and have to draw on Dallas and Fort Worth. That's all. Those that have gets, and it's always going to be that way. It just New York's always been up the top, except the when the new owners come in, they wouldn't go out and spend for kids for about 3 or 4 years. They fell on evil time, but they soon got back and started spending money and getting kids, and they're up on top.
Well, now Kansas City must have a pretty good operation. They dominate that division.
They have a very good operation, and they have a very wealthy man at the head of Ewing Kauffman, and he's a baseball man. Now he wasn't. He still is a very wealthy medical dispenser, and they have one of the outstanding major league owners.